The gentle waves of the Fairhaven coast lapped against the shore as Thomas Harrington stood on the rocky cliff, his sketchbook in hand. At 25, Thomas was a dreamer, a young artist with raw talent and ambitions as vast as the ocean before him. His life in Fairhaven was modest, but the small coastal town had a charm he couldn't deny. It was here that he met Clara Bennett. Clara, with her warm smile and unassuming beauty, worked at her family's bakery, where her kindness drew in customers as much as the scent of fresh bread. Thomas and Clara's love blossomed during long walks by the shore and shared dreams under starlit skies. Clara believed in Thomas's talent, even when he doubted himself. She was his muse, his greatest supporter, and his source of strength. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, Clara's life anchored in simplicity and Thomas's head in the clouds. They felt inseparable. Their wedding was a humble affair, with a handful of family and friends gathered under the old oak tree by the cliffs. Together, they dreamed of a life filled with love, creativity, and the simple joys of being with one another. However, dreams have a way of clashing with reality. As Thomas began to exhibit his art in small galleries, whispers of bigger opportunities reached his ears. He was encouraged to take his work to Ashwood, a thriving city known for its competitive art scene. "This is my chance to prove myself," he told Clara, his voice filled with equal parts excitement and apprehension. Clara, though hesitant, smiled and encouraged him, wanting nothing more than for Thomas to fulfill his potential. But Ashwood was not Fairhaven. The city was a whirlwind of activity, with galleries, critics, and patrons demanding Thomas's attention. His visits home grew infrequent, each one shorter than the last. Phone calls turned into hurried conversations. Letters, once filled with love and promises, became sporadic and impersonal. Clara, who had once been his anchor, now felt like an afterthought in his increasingly busy life. The distance between them grew, not just in miles but in emotion. Clara often stood by the window of their small cottage, her hand on her growing belly, watching the waves crash against the shore. She clung to the hope that Thomas would return to her, but with each passing day, that hope dimmed. Clara's heart sank as she read yet another unsigned letter returned to her by the postman. Over the years, she had written dozens, letters filled with updates about their son, Daniel, and her longing for Thomas to come home. But the silence from Ashwood was deafening. She could no longer ignore the truth. The man she had married was slipping away, consumed by the demands of his career and the allure of the glamorous art world. Life in Fairhaven was far from easy. Clara worked tirelessly at the bakery while raising Daniel, who was the spitting image of his father. The little boy's curious eyes sparkled with mischief, and his love for drawing was evident from a young age. Clara often found him scribbling on scraps of paper with the same intensity she remembered in Thomas. She marveled at how much Daniel resembled his father, both in appearance and in talent, but the resemblance was bittersweet, a constant reminder of what she had lost. Meanwhile, in Ashwood, Thomas's star continued to rise. His paintings, hailed for their raw emotion and intricate detail, drew attention from collectors and critics alike. He became a fixture in the city's elite circles, attending lavish parties and rubbing elbows with influential figures in the art world. But with every accolade, he felt a gnawing emptiness. He avoided thoughts of Fairhaven and the family he left behind, convincing himself that his success was for their benefit, that one day they would understand. For Clara, the final blow came when Thomas failed to return home for Daniel's 5th birthday. The boy had spent the entire day clutching a handmade card, his eyes darting to the door with every passing minute. "Maybe Daddy's just late," Daniel had said, his small voice filled with hope. But as the hours dragged on, Clara knew Thomas wasn't coming. That night, she held Daniel close, vowing to be both mother and father to him. In the months that followed, Clara made the painful decision to let go of Thomas entirely. She stopped writing letters and removed his portrait from the mantelpiece. "It's just us now," she told Daniel, trying to mask the ache in her voice. Despite the pain, Clara found strength in her role as a single mother. She poured her love and energy into raising Daniel, teaching him resilience and kindness, and fostering his budding passion for art. Thomas, on the other hand, buried himself deeper into his work. He refused to acknowledge the void Clara and Daniel had left in his life, instead focusing on his next big exhibition. But even as his paintings sold for staggering amounts and his name became synonymous with artistic brilliance, there were moments when a familiar pang of guilt would creep in. It came in the quiet hours of the night, when the laughter of partygoers faded and the weight of his choices pressed against his chest. Neither Clara nor Thomas could have predicted how their lives, now worlds apart, would one day collide again. Years passed, and the name Thomas Harrington became synonymous with brilliance in the art world. His works hung in prestigious galleries, and wealthy collectors clamored to own his pieces. The man who once struggled to buy paint supplies now lived in a penthouse overlooking the city, his walls adorned with awards and accolades. But for all his success, Thomas led an isolated and hollow existence. The lavish parties and praise from critics felt like echoes in an empty hall, unable to fill the void inside him. Late at night, when the city's noise died down, Thomas often found himself in his studio, staring at unfinished canvases. His work had always been fueled by emotion, but as time passed, he found it harder to tap into the wellspring of inspiration that had once driven him. He realized, in unguarded moments, that the raw emotion in his early paintings came from the life he had left behind, the love, the struggles, and the dreams he had shared with Clara. One evening, while sorting through old storage boxes in his studio, Thomas stumbled upon a forgotten treasure, a small, framed sketch of Clara. It was the first drawing he had ever made of her, back when their love was fresh and unshakable. Her gentle smile gazed back at him, full of warmth and encouragement, and his heart clenched with a mix of nostalgia and regret. He sat down, gripping the frame tightly, and allowed himself to remember. The smell of salt air as they walked along the cliffs, the sound of her laughter, the way her eyes lit up when he spoke about his dreams. But those memories were now tainted with guilt, memories of her standing by the window, waiting for letters that never came, of the birthday he missed when his son was just a boy. Thomas stared at the sketch for hours that night, unable to bring himself to put it away. Something stirred within him, a longing not just to remember, but to reconnect. For the first time in years, he felt compelled to return to the place he had abandoned, to seek out the family he had left behind. But fear held him back. What would he say to Clara, to Daniel? And even if he mustered the courage to face them, could they ever forgive him? While Thomas wrestled with his regrets, life in Fairhaven carried on. Daniel Bennett, now in his early 20s, had grown into a remarkable young man. Tall and charismatic, he bore a striking resemblance to Thomas, though his demeanor was more grounded, shaped by Clara's unwavering love and support. Like his father, Daniel possessed an extraordinary talent for art. But unlike Thomas, he was driven by a deep desire to tell stories through his work, capturing the beauty and resilience of ordinary life. Clara had done her best to shield Daniel from the pain of his father's absence, but she couldn't erase the questions that lingered in his heart. "Why did Dad leave us?" he had asked as a child. Over time, Clara's answers grew more diplomatic. "He made choices that took him far away from us, but that doesn't mean you weren't loved," she would say, though her voice often wavered. Daniel never stopped wondering about Thomas. He knew his father was a renowned artist. His name appeared in magazines and art catalogs that occasionally found their way to Fairhaven. But he didn't dwell on it. Instead, he focused on his own art, pouring his emotions into every brushstroke. His dream was to make a name for himself, not as Thomas Harrington's son, but as an artist in his own right. One day, an opportunity arose that seemed like destiny. A prominent art gallery in Ashwood announced an open call for emerging artists, offering the chance to exhibit their work alongside some of the biggest names in the industry. Clara encouraged Daniel to submit his portfolio, and a few weeks later, he received the news. He had been selected. The exhibition was a career-defining moment, and Clara, proud but nervous, bid him farewell as he boarded the train to Ashwood. The exhibition was a whirlwind. Daniel's work received praise for its emotional depth, and he found himself mingling with seasoned artists and collectors. Among them was Thomas, who attended the event at the behest of a friend. As he strolled through the gallery, his attention was drawn to a particular painting, a vivid, heartfelt depiction of a mother and child standing by the sea, the wind tousling their hair as they gazed at the horizon. The signature at the bottom read Daniel Bennett. Thomas's breath caught in his throat. The name, the painting, it all felt too coincidental. He sought out the artist and found himself face to face with a young man who could have been his reflection from decades ago. Daniel's sharp jawline, his piercing eyes, even the way he carried himself. It was like looking into a mirror of the past. "Your work is remarkable," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Thank you," Daniel replied, offering a polite smile. He didn't recognize Thomas, of course. To him, this was just another admirer of his art. Thomas couldn't tear his eyes away. Every detail confirmed what he already knew in his heart. This was his son. For the rest of the evening, Thomas watched Daniel from a distance, his emotions a tangled web of pride, guilt, and longing. By the time he left the gallery, he had made up his mind. He had to know more about the young man he had unwittingly crossed paths with. This unexpected encounter would set into motion a series of events that would challenge everything Thomas thought he knew about redemption and family. Thomas Harrington couldn't sleep that night. His mind raced with questions about Daniel Bennett, the young man whose striking resemblance to him was impossible to ignore. Could this truly be his son? He remembered Clara's last letter, the one he never opened but could never throw away. It sat in his desk drawer like a relic of another life, its edges yellowed with age. That letter, unopened for so many years, suddenly felt like a key to the answers he sought. With trembling hands, Thomas retrieved the letter. As he read Clara's words, the weight of his choices crashed down on him like a tidal wave. She had written about their son, Daniel, how he loved to draw, how he asked about his father, how much he reminded her of Thomas. Tears blurred the ink as Thomas realized what he had missed. He had a son, and he had abandoned him. The next day, Thomas sought the help of a mutual acquaintance from the art world, a gallery owner who had connections in Fairhaven. Through subtle inquiries, Thomas confirmed what he already knew in his heart. Daniel Bennett was indeed his son. The revelation left him reeling. He felt an overwhelming mix of emotions: joy, shame, regret, and a desperate longing to set things right. Thomas knew he couldn't simply walk back into their lives after all these years. The chasm he had created was too wide, and the memories of his neglect too painful. But he couldn't ignore the opportunity fate had given him. For the first time in decades, Thomas felt a spark of hope. He resolved to do whatever it took to mend the wounds he had caused, even if it meant starting from the shadows. Thomas began his journey of redemption in the only way he knew how, through art. He quietly purchased several of Daniel's paintings from the exhibition, using an alias to avoid drawing attention. He couldn't help but marvel at the depth and emotion in Daniel's work. The paintings told stories of resilience, love, and loss, and Thomas recognized echoes of Clara's influence in every brushstroke. It was as if Daniel's art was a bridge connecting their fractured family. But Thomas didn't stop there. He used his extensive network in the art world to promote Daniel's work, ensuring that his paintings were displayed in prominent galleries and seen by influential critics. With each small success, Daniel's reputation grew, though he remained unaware of the unseen hand guiding his career. For Thomas, supporting his son from the sidelines was both a penance and a privilege. Meanwhile, in Fairhaven, Clara noticed the sudden interest in Daniel's art and couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and suspicion. She had always believed in her son's talent, but the rapid ascent seemed almost too good to be true. Still, she kept her concerns to herself, choosing instead to celebrate Daniel's hard-earned success. Thomas, however, wasn't content with remaining in the shadows. He wanted to connect with Daniel directly, but he knew that revealing the truth too soon could backfire. Instead, he reached out to Daniel under the guise of being a mentor. He wrote a letter introducing himself as an admirer of Daniel's work and offering guidance to help him navigate the art world. Daniel, flattered and eager to learn, accepted the offer without hesitation. Their first meeting was both exhilarating and bittersweet for Thomas. Sitting across from Daniel, he saw flashes of himself in the younger man's passion and determination. But he also saw something he lacked in his youth: a deep humility and gratitude for the life he had. As they talked about art, technique, and inspiration, Thomas felt a bond forming, one that went beyond their shared talent. For Daniel, Thomas's mentorship was a dream come true. He admired the older man's wisdom and generosity, unaware of the deeper connection between them. Under Thomas's guidance, Daniel's confidence grew, and his work flourished. He often spoke about his mother during their conversations, sharing stories of her sacrifices and unwavering support. Each mention of Clara was a knife to Thomas's heart, but he listened intently, determined to understand the family he had left behind. As the weeks turned into months, Thomas and Daniel grew closer. But the secret Thomas carried weighed heavily on him. He knew that his time as an anonymous benefactor and mentor was running out. Sooner or later, the truth would have to come to light. He only hoped that when it did, his son would find it in his heart to forgive him. Thomas and Daniel's relationship deepened with every conversation, every shared moment discussing the intricacies of art and life. Daniel, unaware of their true connection, began to see Thomas as more than a mentor. He saw a man who understood him, someone who seemed to know what it was like to carry the weight of dreams. For Thomas, every interaction with Daniel was bittersweet, a glimpse of what could have been, and a reminder of all he had missed. One afternoon, as they strolled through an art district in Ashwood, Daniel asked a question that caught Thomas off guard. "Have you ever regretted anything in your life, Thomas? Something you wish you could take back?" Thomas hesitated, his heart pounding. The question felt like a test, though Daniel couldn't have known the true weight behind it. "I have," Thomas admitted, his voice heavy. "There was a time when I let ambition blind me to what really mattered. I left behind people who loved me, thinking I'd have time to make it right later. But life doesn't always give you second chances." Daniel studied him, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Did you ever try to fix it?" "I'm trying now," Thomas replied, his gaze distant. "But some wounds take time to heal." Daniel nodded, as if the answer resonated with him on a level he didn't fully understand. For Thomas, the moment was both painful and hopeful, a sign that perhaps, when the truth came out, Daniel might be willing to listen. Over the next few weeks, Thomas continued to invest in Daniel's career, arranging opportunities and introductions that propelled the young artist into the spotlight. Daniel, thrilled by the recognition, often expressed his gratitude to Thomas, unaware of the sacrifices his mentor was making behind the scenes. But Thomas wasn't the only one paying attention. Back in Fairhaven, Clara began to hear whispers about a mysterious benefactor supporting Daniel. At first, she dismissed the rumors, believing them to be exaggerations. But when a family friend returned from Ashwood with news of Daniel's growing relationship with a well-known artist named Thomas Harrington, Clara froze. She knew that name all too well. Clara's mind raced. She couldn't believe that after all these years, Thomas had reappeared in their lives without so much as a word to her. Anger and betrayal simmered beneath the surface as she wrestled with the implications. Was he trying to atone for his mistakes, or was this just another way for him to control their lives from afar? Determined to confront him, Clara made the difficult decision to travel to Ashwood. If Thomas thought he could waltz back into their lives without facing her, he was sorely mistaken. When Clara arrived in Ashwood, her heart was a storm of emotions. The bustling city felt foreign to her, a stark contrast to the quiet streets of Fairhaven. Yet she pushed her nerves aside, determined to face the man who had upended her life. With the gallery address in hand, she set off to find Thomas. Meanwhile, Thomas was preparing for another meeting with Daniel. He had planned to reveal the truth soon, but the timing never felt right. Every time he worked up the courage, he saw Daniel's admiration in his eyes, and the weight of what he might lose held him back. Clara found Thomas in the gallery, alone and gazing at one of Daniel's paintings. She stopped in the doorway, watching him for a moment. His shoulders were hunched, his posture weary. He looked older, more fragile than she remembered. Yet the sight of him filled her with fury. "Thomas," she called out, her voice sharp and unwavering. Thomas turned, his eyes widening in shock. "Clara, you have some nerve," she said, stepping closer. "Coming back into Daniel's life without even speaking to me first. What are you trying to do?" Thomas's face crumpled, the weight of her accusation cutting deep. "Clara, I didn't know how to reach out. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me after everything I've done. You're right, I didn't, she snapped. But here you are, playing the role of a mentor while keeping him in the dark. What's your plan, Thomas? To buy your way back into his life? Into mine? Thomas's voice broke as he replied, I don't want to buy anything, Clara. I just want a chance to make things right. I know I've hurt you both, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But Daniel, he's my son. I couldn't stay away any longer. Clara's anger softened, replaced by the ache of old wounds reopening. She searched his face for sincerity and found it in his tear-filled eyes. If you care about him, she said, her voice trembling, you'll tell him the truth. He deserves to know who you are. Thomas nodded, his hands trembling. I will. I promise. But I need your help, Clara. I need you to be there when I tell him. Clara hesitated, torn between her lingering resentment and the desire to protect Daniel from more pain. After a long silence, she finally agreed. He deserves the truth, she said. But if you hurt him again, Thomas, I won't forgive you. Later that evening, Thomas invited Daniel to the gallery for what he described as an important conversation. As Daniel entered, he was surprised to see his mother waiting alongside Thomas. Confusion flickered across his face. What's going on? He asked, looking between them. Thomas took a deep breath, his hands clenching and unclenching nervously. Daniel, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. The room fell silent as Thomas began to speak, his voice filled with regret. I'm not just your mentor. I'm your father. Daniel's eyes widened in shock, his mind struggling to process the revelation. What? I left Fairhaven years ago, Thomas continued, his voice cracking. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I let my ambition blind me to what really mattered, and I lost you and your mother because of it. I've regretted it every day since. Daniel's expression shifted from shock to anger. You knew? All this time, you knew who I was, and you didn't say anything? I was afraid, Thomas admitted. Afraid of how you'd react, afraid of making things worse. But I couldn't stay silent any longer. You deserve the truth, Daniel, and you deserve to decide what comes next. Daniel turned to Clara, searching her face for answers. Mom, did you know? Clara nodded, her voice soft. I only found out recently. I wanted to protect you, Daniel, but I couldn't keep this from you. The weight of the moment pressed down on all three of them. Daniel's fists clenched as he fought back tears. You abandoned us, he said to Thomas, his voice trembling. You left us, and now you think you can just come back and fix everything? Thomas stepped closer, his own tears falling freely. I don't expect you to forgive me, Daniel. I just want a chance to prove that I'm not the man I was back then. Please, give me that chance. The room fell silent once more, the air thick with tension and unspoken emotions. Daniel didn't respond. He simply turned and walked out of the gallery, leaving Thomas and Clara standing together, their hearts heavy with the uncertain road ahead. The days after the revelation were a blur for Daniel. He retreated to his studio, seeking solace in his art, but even painting couldn't quiet the storm raging inside him. His mind swirled with conflicting emotions, anger, confusion, and a lingering ache he couldn't name. The man he had admired as a mentor was the same man who had abandoned him and his mother. How could he reconcile the two? Clara gave him space, knowing her son needed time to process the truth. But Thomas couldn't stay away. He sent Daniel a letter, a heartfelt apology written late at night when guilt and hope kept him awake. Daniel, I know I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. You have every right to be angry with me. But I want you to know that meeting you, seeing the man you've become, has been the greatest privilege of my life. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my days trying to earn it. Thomas. Daniel read the letter countless times, the words sinking deeper with each reading. He thought about the time he had spent with Thomas before he knew the truth, their conversations, the wisdom Thomas had shared, the quiet moments that felt strangely familiar. Part of him hated that he still felt a connection, but another part longed to understand the man who had left such a deep scar in his life. Finally, Daniel reached out. He asked Thomas to meet him at a small cafe near the art district. When Thomas arrived, he looked nervous, his hands trembling as he sat down. Daniel, too, felt the weight of the moment, but he forced himself to speak. "Why did you leave us?" Daniel asked, his voice steady but laced with pain. Thomas looked down, his eyes filled with regret. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I was young, selfish, and so focused on my career that I convinced myself you and your mother would be better off without me. But I was wrong. I was a coward, Daniel, and I've paid for it every day since." Daniel studied him, searching for sincerity. "Do you know what it was like growing up without a father? Watching Mom work herself to the bone to make sure I had everything I needed." Thomas nodded, his voice breaking. "I can't imagine the strength it took for her to raise you on her own. She's an incredible woman, and I'll always regret that I wasn't there to support her. But I see her strength in you, Daniel, and I see your talent, your passion. I'm so proud of you." The raw emotion in Thomas's voice chipped away at the wall Daniel had built around his heart. He didn't know if he was ready to forgive, but he couldn't ignore the sincerity in his father's words. Over the next few weeks, Thomas, Clara, and Daniel began to navigate the fragile process of rebuilding their family. Thomas visited Fairhaven, spending time with Clara and Daniel in the home he had abandoned so many years ago. The house was filled with old memories and new possibilities, and slowly, the icy tension began to thaw. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Daniel asked a question that surprised them all. "Would you teach me?" he said, looking at Thomas. "Not just about art, but about everything you've learned. If we're going to move forward, I want to understand who you are now." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I'd be honored," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Months passed, and the Harrington family began to heal. The journey wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, old wounds reopened by unspoken memories. But there were also moments of laughter, of shared stories and new experiences that began to fill the void left by years of separation. Thomas decided to step back from the art world, choosing to focus on his family and support Daniel's burgeoning career. He sold his penthouse in Ashwood and moved into a small, unassuming house in Fairhaven, not far from Clara and Daniel. For the first time in decades, he felt at peace. Meanwhile, Daniel's career soared. With Thomas's guidance and Clara's unwavering support, he became a rising star in the art world, known for his emotionally resonant paintings. Critics marveled at the depth of his work, often noting the familial themes that seemed to radiate from every canvas. One of Daniel's most celebrated pieces was a painting titled Second Chances. It depicted three figures, a young man, a woman, and an older man, standing together on a windswept beach, their faces turned toward the horizon. The painting, Daniel explained, was about forgiveness and the beauty of rebuilding what was once lost. At the unveiling of the painting, Thomas and Clara stood by Daniel's side, their pride evident in their smiles. For Thomas, the moment felt like redemption. For Clara, it was a testament to the strength of love and resilience. And for Daniel, it was the culmination of a journey that had taught him the power of forgiveness. As they left the gallery that evening, Daniel turned to his parents. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" Clara asked, her voice warm. "For giving me a family again," Daniel replied. The three of them walked out into the night, the weight of the past replaced by the promise of the future. Together, they had proven that while time could not erase the scars of the past, it could create space for healing, growth, and the hope of a new beginning. Years later, the Harrington family found themselves gathered in a sunlit studio overlooking the Fairhaven coastline. The room was filled with the soft hum of creativity, brushes gliding across canvases, the faint clink of paint jars, and the occasional laugh that echoed with warmth. It was a scene none of them could have imagined years ago, but one they cherished deeply. Thomas, now retired from the spotlight of the art world, had found a new purpose. He spent his days mentoring young artists in Fairhaven, using his experience to guide others while staying rooted in the community he once left behind. His greatest joy, however, came from working alongside his son. Clara had reclaimed her sense of peace. The years of struggle and heartache had given way to a life filled with love and connection. She often sat in the studio with Thomas and Daniel, her hands busy with small crafts while she watched her family rebuild their bond. As for Daniel, his star continued to rise. His art spoke to people in ways that transcended words, capturing the complexities of love, loss, and redemption. Yet despite his success, he remained grounded, never forgetting the sacrifices his mother made or the lessons he learned from his father. One afternoon, Daniel unveiled a new painting, its centerpiece a vibrant depiction of a family embracing on a windswept beach. He called it Homecoming. Thomas and Clara stood beside him, their emotions swirling as they took in the painting's details, the echoes of their shared journey, captured on canvas for the world to see. "I couldn't have done this without you," Daniel said, his voice thick with gratitude. Thomas placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice steady but full of emotion. "No, Daniel, you're the one who gave me a second chance. You reminded me of what truly matters." Clara smiled, her eyes glistening. "And you both remind me that love can overcome even the deepest wounds." As the three of them stood together, the light streaming through the studio windows seemed to wrap them in a warm embrace, a reflection of the healing they had found. Life had not been perfect, but it had given them the opportunity to rewrite their story. Together, they had turned a tale of loss into one of hope, proving that it's never too late to reclaim love, repair what's broken, and start anew. In the end, their story wasn't just about second chances. It was about the courage to take them and the strength to create something beautiful from the fragments of the past. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the heartfelt story, The Millionaire's Second Chance, a reunion that changes everything. We hope this story touched your heart and brought you meaningful moments. If you enjoyed the story, please give us a like to show your support. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any exciting stories in the future. And if you have any thoughts or feedback, feel free to share them with us in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you in our next story. Have a wonderful day.